Milan Parris just decommitted from Iowa State. We're going to take a look at some senior year film. I think we're going to watch 3 clips, and we're going to be convinced that this might be the best available wide receiver in the country. Certainly a guy, in my opinion, that's been flying under the radar. After watching him again, his recruitment's going to heat up now that he's decommitted from Iowa State, that's for sure. And then watching the senior year film, this is a guy that's going to see the field pretty early. So listed at 6'5.5", according to 24/7. On other websites, he's listed at 6'5". He really reminds me of Jaden Higgins, and that's an easy comparison to make just because of the Iowa State connection and all that kind of stuff. But you look at the way that Jaden Higgins moved at 6'4", not only in a straight line, but the change of direction, just the overall athleticism that Jaden Higgins had at 6'4". Milan Parris is like that, but he's got an inch or an inch and a half on Jaden Higgins. We're going to look at the explosiveness, the long speed. He doesn't move like he's 6'5.5". A lot of these kids, especially in high school, they just kind of lumber around. They're good for a jump, a fade ball every now and then. Every now and then they'll be open downfield and they score a long touchdown. That's all nice. I have no issue. I have no worries about Milan Parris being able to separate at the next level because of how quick he is in and out of his cuts. Honestly, I think the reason that this kid's not being talked about as a 5-star is because of how tall he is. I think that people start worrying about receivers' ability to separate when they're this tall, the route running, the change of direction. And I understand that's the case for a lot of these kids that are 6'4", 6'3 plus. You just take a look at the way Milan Parris moves. Like, if you didn't know he was 6'5.5", I don't think you'd have any kind of those problems. Like, look at him coming across the field here, just how easy these cuts are, despite him having really long legs. That's really what it comes down to. I'm not trying to be weird or anything, but the way that you cut, the way you change direction depends on, it's easier when you have shorter legs. You talk a lot about these taller wide receivers being striders downfield. That's for certain something that Milan Parris does, but at the same time, he's really quick in and out of his cuts. And then you also have the ability to stretch the field, and then you have the ability to be a dominant wide receiver at the catch point, not only being tall, but having that athletic ability, that basketball ability to attack the rebound, that kind of stuff. I don't really know what else I can say about Milan Parris, because a lot of times you'll see wide receivers like this, and you won't see the route running in high school, and you'll see with the ball in their hand, they have good change of direction ability, but the high school coaches won't really ask them to do much besides run in a straight line because that's what works. I think we actually see a pretty decent amount of route running from Milan Parris, not just being bigger than opposing defenders. It reminds me a lot of Jaden Higgins at Iowa State, to be honest. And again, I know that's the easy comparison with them having an Iowa State connection, Milan Parris just decommitting, but really impressive stuff. This is going to be a guy, like I said, it's going to be in a lot of conversations. I'm sure a lot of teams across the country all of a sudden are trying to find more NIL money because he's on the market again. Like, this slant, we don't see this a lot from 6'5.5" wide receivers in high school. A lot of times the high school coach would just ask him to run a fade, and that works, 90% of the time because he's going to be like 5 inches taller than the opposing cornerback. But I think we see him pretty quick in and out of his breaks, especially for 6'5.5". But going to be really interesting to see where this dude ends up because he obviously has the physical traits to see the football field early. I think the athletic traits as well is really what makes him stick out. Look at the way he's just blowing past defenders here. You just cannot gear down for a half second because he's going to make you pay over the top for sure. Anyways, that was Milan Parris. Milan Parris, 2 cities I've never been to, but for certain that Milan Parris, the football player, is a very good, not only a good athlete, good football player overall. You guys let me know what you think about him, what school you think he should end up at. Thanks for watching.